Driftwood. What is the driftwood? Is there any importance of the driftwood? Where it's come from? How far it can travel? What's the role the driftwood play in the beach ecosystems and life and general processes? In this video I invite you to walk with me on some of the beaches in New Zealand, see what is a driftwood, what it does, and maybe discuss some problems they might face in the future with the driftwood. Yes, you hear me correctly, there could be some problem with the driftwood in the future. Let's find out what is this. So what is the driftwood? If you ever walk on the beach, you probably met some pieces of wood on the beach. Could be little pieces, big ones, or the whole trunk of the tree. That's what we call the driftwood. Drift means drifting, something that's been carried from far away, or maybe along the beach, maybe from the neighbor beach, maybe from the neighbor river valley, or maybe from the different continent. And if a piece of wood or the whole trunk travel through the sea or ocean and been deposited eventually, it will be called the driftwood. I've been on some beaches around the planet, but when I come to New Zealand and I visited some of the beach, I couldn't believe what I see. They're just piles and piles of wood. Whole trunks of tree with roots and sometimes even with leaves. Sometimes you can see the big boulders carried by those big trunks of the wood. This is all the driftwood. And it comes and goes. So basically, to have a driftwood, you need to have a piece of wood that been travel into the water on some point, usually and more probable, bring to the water by the river. And then it will be carried by the waves along the coast for some time, and then at some point will be deposited on the beach. And some beaches have much more driftwood than other. And of course, it will depend on the supply of the wood. So if we have nearby the good river that during the floods or any other processes, storms, rainfall, will bring a lot of wood. Eventually you have big supply of the driftwood on the beach further down. But not all driftwood will end up on the neighbor beach. Some of it will be carried away and taken far, far away. So if I look at the definition of the driftwood, it's just a wood that have been washed onto a shore or beach of a sea, lake or river by the action of winds, tides or waves. And it's a part of the beach wreck. And yes, the driftwood often can stay on the beach, sometimes can be carried away into the sea again during the next storm and probably maybe dissolved in the ocean and get decomposed. By the time we deposit it, often it will be carried to some beach, maybe left there to decompose, but more often it will be buried by the sand or rocks or some other material and eventually will be part of the beach. That's an example of the South Island of New Zealand. Explore some of driftwood. So that's the beach in New Zealand and it's piled with wood. So much wood there. And if we look from the satellite image in Google Earth, hopefully even from the satellite image you can see the driftwood. It depends when the image was taken. So the driftwood will appear very frequent after storms, after severe rainfall type of weather conditions, so it will be depends on what's happening with the climate. Hokitika, it's one of the places in New Zealand where it's kind of like a mecca of the driftwood. They have festivals there that are related to the driftwood. If I move my point to Hokitika and just explore the beach there, you can see there's the big rivers bring a lot of material, and this type of beaches which are wide, sandy beach with the rocks, and that's why we have a lot of driftwood accumulated. South Island of New Zealand is one of the places in the world where we have a lot of driftwood, and it will be related to the weather conditions here, the rivers, the topography, the currents, and also probably the type of vegetation that is here in New Zealand. And actually, even if you just look on satellite images. So we have this big Hust River, which bringing a lot of material from the mountains, from the Southern Alps. A lot of valleys bringing its material, fed by some melting away glaciers, even though. Probably some of them already melted away. Not much glaciers stay there now. But in the spring, for example, we have a dramatic influx of the water. So first of all, melting snow, but secondly, the patterns, the climatic patterns of New Zealand as such. So in spring, we have a lot of storms, a lot of rain, sometimes flooding happen. So a lot of material will be moved down through the valleys. And when you have a heavy rainfall, so when you look at Google Earth profile of the river here, so when you have a heavy rainfall, from shore to shore, all this distance will be filled with the water. And everything that here, it will be, first of all, some wood trees will be falling down from the cliffs, carried by the streams. It will be all picked up and carried down towards the sea, towards the ocean eventually, and deposited. And often it's pick up some older wood that already been here sitting for some time and redeposited. Often the new branches and trees will be plucked away and carried down. The forces of the water during the storm or the big flood event, big rainfall, dramatic. You have not just water coming through these rivers, there's a lot of rocks carried away, silts and muds, of course, and it's all kind of milky, loud, noisy river there, and you can hear a lot of type of sand and gravels crushing of each other, and boom boom bonk noises, which is the boulders that carrying down along the bottom of the river. And of course the wood, the trees will be carried with this, and it will be deposited, it will be dumped into the sea, and you can see the currents as well here of the material, and eventually it might straight away or eventually being dumped towards the shore. So it depends on the wind direction, the waves action, and how far they can carry that wood. And the Hust Beach, amazingly full of wood. And I just want to show you that even from satellite image, sometimes you can see this driftwood. If you have a look closely, you can see pieces of the wood lying on a beach. Because sometimes this piece is quite big. You can see like a big stumps here, big trunks of the trees. A lot of just the rubble of the smaller pieces. This driftwood is very good for us, for people who like beaches, because it's accumulate the sand, and it's actually promoting accumulation and growing of the material, because sand stuck between this driftwood and some plants that established, and eventually you start creating, accumulate naturally the beach. There's a very famous terraces here you can see. So it's all used to be in the past beach. So this, I think, is about 1,000 or 2,000 years old story of accumulation, but this also related to tectonics. If you just walk around South Island in Google, you will see a lot of pictures there. You can see a lot of driftwood, and people get carried away. People in New Zealand like to create sculptures, craft driftwood. I always been advised not to burn the wood from the beach, because it's have salts, and it's actually gonna eventually ruin your stove or chimney, whatever you have, where you're gonna burn the food. People burn wood a lot. Firewood is considered today to be dangerous to burn, and government of British Columbia, for example, suggesting items should never burn in your wood burning appliances. It will be the driftwood, because it's released toxic chemicals when burned. The dioxins may be released from the reaction of chloride ions with the other materials in the smoke. To carry on and talk about driftwood, we should figure out just the basics about the beaches. So there's two types, roughly, there's different types of beaches exist, but two types by the processes beaches exist. One beach that are kind of more eroding through its history, recent history or longer term history, and we call it abrasion beach or denudation beach. And other beach which is depositional or accretion beach, or the beach which kind of growing through the time, and it depends on how long term you're looking at. Or you can have accumulation beach which kind of growing, accumulating material with time, so its profile getting flatter and it's getting longer towards the sea, but eventually you'll have big storm or some event and it will become erosional beach. Yeah, so it will depends on situation, climate, what's happening with the sea level, and tectonics as well. So sometimes we have situation, we have erosional beach, so it's constantly profile getting very steep. It's removing more material than it's accumulating on the beach. That's what's called erosional beach. Usually if you see a lot of cliffs, short, maybe none sand or gravels at the bottom, a lot of material dumped, and it's waves crashing into closer to the beach, we call it erosional beach. And accretion or accumulation beach, that's how I used to call it when I was studying back in the day. It's more beaches which wider, more sand you can find there, or other material. Doesn't have to be sand, could be rocks, could be volcanic material, but the idea is that the beach actually kind of gradually increasing, growing. And of course depends on the flight, tide activity, and the sediment supply. It can change. And very important part in it played the human activity around the coastal areas. We could take away the river supply of the sediment, and you're further down by the current of the sea or the ocean, your beach will, instead of accretion, accumulation beach, will become erosional, because you don't have any more enough material brought by the waves, but the waves action will stay same or even stronger due to the climate change or something like that, or sea level rise, and eventually this beach will be eroded away, so material will be moved more than accumulated, and eventually you will end up with no beach. And if you build your expensive hotel or house next to this type of beach, you might be in a little trouble. What else affecting the type of the beach we have? So general sea level change, the location where you are, supply. So you might have, as I say, change in the river pattern or material supply. So if we build a dam or cut down all the trees up the stream of the river, there'll be no more material carried down enough, and can change the situation on the beach. So it very much depends what's happening. It's interesting that I found some articles suggesting that in the past there was much more driftwood around the world. In particular, for example, there's an article where they talk about Iceland. You can read it in internet. There's an article published in 2022 based on research, and it talks about how the driftwood supply diminishing in Iceland. And apparently in the northern hemisphere there's places where, especially in those Arctic colder areas, where we don't have much bigger trees growing naturally, so there's a smaller type of the trees. Or the environment there, like in Iceland, there's a lot of volcanic material, glaciers, so there's not much trees growing at all. And a lot of trees here you can see on this beach, apparently it came from far away, from Eurasia. Apparently these trees come from Siberia, as it's been researched. This article suggested and done research that the Vikings first who arrived to places like Iceland, some believe in Greenland as well, have been occupied later. And the people were using not the local wood to burn, but the driftwood. And today we can figure out by going to the settlements and isotope analysis, chemistry analysis of the remnants in the stove, of the wood that they were burning, and it can tell you, the region where it's come from, this wood that were burning, so we can for sure know where it came from. Here they say in an article of Global and Planetary Change that much of the Iceland driftwood originates from Arctic, far across from Arctic Ocean, and it trees that coming from central Siberia region, from Russia, and they doing several years journey, thousands of kilometers, and eventually they deposited there around Iceland, maybe I'll suggest Greenland and some other islands too. One of the scientists say here that's very important was for establishing settlements in Iceland. If they didn't have this driftwood coming from Siberia, this settlement would just not survive in Iceland. Also, they suggested that right now we have much less driftwood now, and it's a decline abruptly from 1980s. And they suggested by 2016, by 2060 you can argue, for example, particular years or forecasts that the driftwood is declining and might cease to arrive to Iceland. And it depends on the climate change and warming ocean. The scientists suggested that the wood that been carried by the ocean can stay there up to for 10 months or more, and the ice play a role to transporting it, so it's freeze-thaw cycle of the Arctic Sea play a role. And it stays traveling in those ice, and then eventually it get washed up when it's thaw nearby shore as a driftwood. Sea ice is a conveyor belt that basically enables the Arctic to be quite connected, even though it's basically an ocean. Right now this conveyor belt been broken, slowing down, and its energy to transport would have a concern. Yeah. For the environment, the driftwood very important. It's agent to transport material and the organisms. And some of the islands around Antarctica been researched even back in the day, and there was suggestion that different type of driftwood was found there, and that's one of the suggestion how some of the plants or seeds or animals been traveling around our planet, and it's a very important part of it. Recent research of driftwood studied around Antarctica. And Antarctica as well getting cleared from the ice recently. Its coastlines getting more exposed. Scientists getting concerned about pollution of the Antarctica, not just by plastic, that as well as the driftwood can be transported and traveled thousands of kilometers. They start modeling how far the driftwood, for example, will travel from some of the coasts of New Zealand. It can get carried by some of the currents. It can get till Antarctica in a matter of time. And they even simulated it. I'm not sure if they actually physically tested it, because you can't physically test it if you put a tracking device into the driftwood and leave it, but what the chances it will be carried down to Antarctica. But the simple simulation of the currents and the wind around Antarctica, which is well known, well studied, well researched these days, can show you where it will end up. And I know this type of models because I used to be involved in the model Baltic Sea, which was modeling the spill of the oil in Baltic. It was initiated by the Swedish, but it's basically all the countries around the Baltic were involved in this modeling. So using the currents, properties of the water in the Baltic, the wind, you put models of your climate. For example, in the weather, you can check what's happened last week. You can predict what's happened next couple of days. And if you have the emergency, like an oil spill, and we did tested it in the situations when there was an oil spill, actually happened. You can simulate if you have properties of your oil in a particular tank or ship, and you can figure out how far it will be traveling, which shore beach will be deposited, because oil is very bad. It's a topic of different video, but the oil is very bad for ocean because it spreads into the very thin layer. So 1 liter of the oil can spread on hundreds of centimeters, meters all over the surface, and it's impermeable layer. So there's no oxygen exchange, so it's basically making everything dead, whatever it sits on. And it can travel these spills quite far, depends on your weather, the time, and eventually be deposited on the beach and basically killed whatever you have on the beach. Life, organisms, ecosystems, precious ecosystems, which usually associated with the beaches. So similar, we can simulate around Antarctica and see what can happen. And people finding that not just the driftwood, which is okay, the travel, it's already done before many times probably, but Antarctica was staying more or less isolated for a long time because of the sea ice and the ice and the current around Antarctica, which particular strong and strongest on our planet, and it kind of kept it isolated from the rest of the world. But now the coastlines of Antarctica are getting more connected with the rest of the world, and It could be not just the organisms' life will be brought to Antarctica, which might change its ecosystem. Similar think about some bugs or bees or rabbits brought to Australia, how it's changed its landscape and ecosystem. There is concern about animals or plants being brought to the Antarctica, but also the pollution. So the plastic moved around our ocean, nothing happens to it apart from some life can occupy it, and it will be deposited on the shores of Antarctica. And then I'm sure it already does. People just don't go and check. I see the rubbish coming from far away on the beaches all around New Zealand. Rubbish being brought to the places which are quite remote. So it's not on the way of some main cities or river currents. So it might be brought even from different countries or continents or countries. Just floating rubbish around the ocean. So that's I found quite interesting about driftwood and application around the world. And also around the world, the driftwood is diminishing. I don't think it's only related to the role of the sea ice. In my personal opinion, it's the way we regulate the rivers, first of all. Secondly, the cutting down trees all around the world. People cutting trees, putting farms, animal farms, or building cities, houses. Basically, we're reducing dramatically the number of driftwood. And there was some researchers saying that when they arrived to New Zealand or South America back in the day, in 1900, there was much more driftwood, like dramatic decrease noted of the driftwood around the world. And I will attribute it to people building the houses, regulating the rivers, building dams, cutting down the trees. Cutting down the trees was a very big thing around our planet, which we're not even aware of. Especially in the last several years, you can see it, how it's dramatic by comparing the satellite images of all the times, like 10 years ago and now. Or if you go to any museum, natural history museum, for example, New Zealand, how the New Zealand trees, natural forest was cut down by the settlement of the people, first people here, even before Europeans, but then Europeans arrived. And it's interesting, if I go to any museum and watch to any area where around my neighborhood, how it was empty when it was photographed firstly in the beginning of 20th century, when the cameras become, more or less popular. I always think it should be more trees in the past, but there was a lot of trees in the past, and people come and then they start cutting down everything. They would just clear it up. They're burning the wood, first of all, for the means of get warmer, and secondly, to clear up the space environment to make a pastures for animals, cows and sheep. And there's a couple papers, and people stated that with industrial logging practices, the global quantity of the driftwood was declined. Driftwood is very good place for life to occupy while it's still in the ocean, or then when it's deposited on the beach. And if you walk around any beaches where you have driftwood, you can observe it's not always just an empty log. It could be some habitat. Early photographs in the Pacific coast show a lot of driftwood on the beaches. People describing in late 19th century that the beaches were piled high with drift, often to a height of 60 feet or more. It's a rare we can see anything like that. It's the main reason that the driftwood cannot travel as far, and it's become basically dropped to the bottom of the ocean, waterlogged, and as a result it's faster decomposed and getting trained into the sediment in the bottom of the ocean. However, there's other reasons, and probably I stated it, that we have more regulated rivers, less forests around the rivers, and even the beaches all around the planet getting more regulated by people, putting dams, boats, marinas, and this kind of stuff. And just probably will be the human factor. However, in the places still were quite active, you have a lot of wood being carried around, and you can see that a big trunk of trees could be carried. And I have some videos of walking on the beach during the storm or after the storm, and you can see there's a lot of wood dumped on the beach. Some of this wood was carried just from up the beach, there's a river flow, inflow, or it could be come from far, far away. A lot of wood we can find on a beach, it's actually been treated by humans, so it's basically some old fences or poles or something like that, or logs carried down. But it's interesting how during the storm or after the storm you can see how the beach changed so fast and how much driftwood there are. In some places on the beach you can see there's not many wood at all, and in some places there's a lot of wood. And as I told you, it depends of your supply, the particular currents in the shoreline. So sometimes the river will gonna bring a lot of material and be drifted away further down and deposited further down, or sometimes it'll be carried into the open sea or ocean. Sometimes it'll be just dumped down your current. I was trying to record it, how big waves can straight away carry back down the wood that they already deposited. So it's a very ongoing process. So the trunks of the wood will be dropped and picked up next storm and again. So it's a lot of reworking happens, and you can actually trace it and study. I know in New Zealand people are studying you can figure out the type of wood, you can figure out specifically where it's come from, which valley. In New Zealand, for example, you have some valleys when you have more particular one type of forest wood than another, and you can trace it when it's along the coast, when you see more of this type of wood or that type of wood. And it will give information about the currents and how they carry material. Driftwood is a very great place for the animals, of course, sea animals, and animals on the shore on the beach. Here I find some seeds as well, so they get carried away around. Sometimes they might even help to spread some plants on around the planet or around the continent. On our beach we see a lot of volcanic type of rocks, and although there is not like in vicinity of any outcrops of the rocks or volcano, and they obviously been carried away from far, far away. Usually after the storm you find a lot of rubbish, which you should take with you to the rubbish bin. So here you see basically very typical New Zealand type of accumulation beach, I would say that one. And we have a lot of rocks mixed with the driftwood. The bigger rocks, so if it's like a pumice, they usually floats on the surface and they carry it all around. But sometimes you can find some good sandstone or graviaki stones or granite boulders. They stuck in the roots of the tree and they can carry it far away. And if you have some questionable lithology on the beach, think about the transportation with the driftwood. It could be one of the reasons it carried away from the source so far away. It was a very stormy day when I walk around this beach, and I just want to show you the mixture of artificial wood carried around with pieces of natural wood drifted, and some of the stuff being deposited before on the same beach and being just moved a little bit further down. But there's always places on the beach where you have more driftwood, like outburst, and that tells you about the energy of the current. So there'll be the place where the current will energy of it will be just reduced enough so it will go into the depositional mode, so we're not going to carry these logs further down but deposit it here. Same like with the sand or any other material. Very often I found on the beach a lot of fishing stuff which you find in the ocean, and our ocean is the big basically rubbish bin for all of this stuff. The life already occupied it. There's a lot of organisms living. It sounds like this buoy was in the water for some time, and therefore there's organisms, shells, they already actively occupied it. If you live in New Zealand, you might get into the collecting the driftwood and do some crafts with it. For example, this is the sculpture, and there's a festival in Hokitika, South Island, where people get into the building something interesting from the driftwood. And it's something you can explore. Go on the website, have a look imagination of people, what they do from the driftwood. And I found it's very nice and clean, because you build something from the driftwood and rocks, especially if you do it on the beach, you'll get carried away after, so it's not like you're producing something from plastic or something bad. It's all natural material, and hopefully in the future people will do something like that more, rather than creating artificial materials which only polluting our planet. So I hope you get an idea about the driftwood. It's just some interesting points I found about the driftwood. And every time you go on the beach, there's something new you can find on the beach. And there's so many processes you can observe just by quietly sitting and watching the wave in action. Hope you have a lot of sunny days. Share my videos with everyone who will be interested, and I'll see you in my next videos.